Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Today, I wanted to talk about the 545 and my case that Americans need to take a second look at this cartridge. Specifically, this was brought up by one of the new followers I have for New Mexico Black Rifle Operators. They were talking about how the caliber is, how it's anemic, or that it's a crap caliber. I think that is specifically has to do with the American perception of it. American perception is anything we convert to metric, we tend to not like. So let's get started. The dimensions of the 545 are as follows. So it is a bottleneck cartridge. It is the one farthest to the right on this picture. The top one is the 545, or the farthest one to the left is the 545, not 545, 762 by 54R. The next one is the 308. The next one is the 762 by 39 Russian, or the 220 Russian. That is the parent cartridge for all the X39 cartridges in the Soviet Union or in Russia. And it is basically like a parent cartridge like we would have in the United States. So everything's based on this cartridge. If you look in the middle, though, that is the 556. Now, why do I say this is interesting for a cartridge? Well, first off, in practice, I have two 545s. So for full disclosure, I'm saying this because I'm a fan of the cartridge. Now, I got into the cartridge because I'm an AK guy. But there's a use case, I believe, that we need to look at this from the American perspective. This cartridge is, for all intensive purposes, very similar, if not the same, as the 556. So why would you want to change something different? My youngest son, is very recoil conscious. Even the 556, it jumps a little more than the 545. Maybe that's the weight of the guns. But if you're trying to get a new shooter into the sport, it is really advantageous and to have low recoil. So the specs itself say that the 545 has half the recoil, which is 5.5 foot-pounds or newtons going back into your shoulder for the 556. It is 2.5 newtons or pounds going into your shoulder for the 545. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, and really there is not a lot with recoil with a 556, but that little tiny bit is perceptible. The next thing I would say is that rifle support. We're seeing more and more support in the market. You can buy uppers for AR-15s, which is the most common gun in the United States, which is also America's rifle. But what if you start looking at the specifications? The specifications for this guy are right in line with the 556, but with a shorter cartridge and just about the same cartridge capacity. So again, you're saying, what's the case for 545? Well, my great white hope for this is that someone at AAC or Hornady A sees this and sees that there's a market for the 545. RCBS is already making reloading dies for these, or has been for years, because they make custom caliber dies. But bullet support, projectile support, is hard to find. It is a 220 or a 219, depending upon the spec sheet you find for it. And what would make it really enticing, I think, for the American shooting sports specifically, is that it is a longer bullet. And when you look at that, you see... No, I don't see it there. So let's get back to the dimensions. The bullet is actually longer, right? And from experience with reloading and what I've seen in the newer bullet technologies, specifically from Hornady, because I'm a huge fan of theirs, and Sierra, I'm a huge fan of that. They're not the most expensive bullets, but they are very accurate, very timely bullets, especially the Hornady bullets lately. But the newer technology leads credence that this may have a better ballistic coefficient than a 5.56 because it's got a longer bullet, like the 6.5 or the 6.8, which is a 270 bullet. That longer bearing surface makes it stabilize better over distance of the barrel. The other thing is with the 5.45 specifically, is that it's designed for burning all of its powder before the projectile leaves the barrel. Now, why is that a big deal? That means that if you have a shorter barreled rifle, or a shorter barrel than 16 inches, say 14.5, 10.5, anything like that, you're less likely to lose bullet speed because the powder has already expended. You're just having to deal with the pressure curve that goes through the thing, through the barrel and the chamber. The next thing I would say about this is that the 5.45 needs American support because right now, if you're going to reload for this, you have to swag bullets, take 5.56 brass, size it down so that you're changing the neck dimensions for the 5.45. And when you do this, you start having to trim it, and there's a lot of labor intensity is the best way to put it into making 5.56 brass into 5.45. With that, those brass, because you put a lot of labor into it, you don't want to lose them. And with a semi-automatic, unless you're on a clean range where you can just pick up the brass from there, and you're gonna have to fight the brass gremlins at ranges, right, that are trying to get this, because they're case stamped or their head stamped with 5.56. That's another safety concern. You don't want one of these floating around in a 5.56 ammo can. That said, I can tell you from experience what happens is it won't chamber in a 5.56. The bullet hits the neck or the very, very end of the barrel, and it actually pushes the whole bolt carrier group back. So there is a safety margin here already, but I'd like to see that increased by support. Like I said, the great white hope is that AAC, the guys that are now own our Palmetto State Armory spun up for ammunition, they're already making ammunition for the most popular calibers. Hornady used to make steel case with a 60 grain bullet, and the Civi ammo, so let's get to that. The Civi ammo is actually on this sheet, and it shows what they did. They did 60 grain bullets. So again, that longer bullet length gives credence or gives the ability to use a heavier bullet weight. I think that would make this cartridge even better for varminting, or possibly if you can get 60 or 70 grain bullets or 77 grain bullets, maybe match shooting. Maybe it would be better for just in general, it'd be a better cartridge. Maybe you could use it as a light deer, white-tailed deer cartridge or something. I know that back east there's some caliber restrictions on the bullet diameter, but if this in the west, we can use the 5.56 last time I checked. Now I have to double check don't take this as advice. I have to double check the proclamation in New Mexico. But what that did is you do always want a heavier bullet. Now, I've seen my brothers and my dad drop New Mexico mule deer when this was legal with 5.56. But they were using 70 grain or 62 grain, heavier weight for caliber bullets. If this is giving the same performance with the same type of cartridge dimensions with lower recoil, why wouldn't we want to do this? The other thing it does that's unique about the 5.45 and the 220 Russian in general is that case dimension. Let's go back to that case dimensions. Okay, when you look at the case, there's less of an angle between the rim and the bottleneck itself than there is on the 5.56. This aids in extraction for the AK. So in adverse conditions, the brass can come out of the chamber easier, or the steel case, which is most the case. The other thing with the 545, that this is why I would like to see more civilian support for it and American shooters adopt it a little more, because that's the only way we're going to get support for the cartridge, is that most, or a good chunk of the military surplus ammo for this caliber is corrosive. That's something that's unique to the Russians. It also doesn't have a lot of anti-flare agents in the powder, so it has a noticeable difference in the fireball that comes out the end of your gun. I'd like to see modern American powders adjusted for this type of thing. Now, I have tried to reload for the 545. I had a friend who had a set of dies, and we were trying this out, and we worked up a load, and it became more labor intensive than it was worth to try to do for this cartridge for what we were trying to do with it. This is the key essence of why I think the 545 needs to be looked at again by American shooters. With more rifles and more short-barreled rifles and pistols coming into the country in this design, or already in this design, or in this caliber, there is going to be a need and a demand for this. And right now, since we can't get Russian ammo because Russians, well, they invaded a country and are turds, it would be extremely exceptional to find an American ammunition source locally to the United States. And right now, you have to depend on the former Eastern Bloc, so you're talking about like Romania and Bulgaria, and we can't even really do a lot of stuff with some like Belarus and all those guys. So it would be nice to see this in here. The other thing it could possibly do is we've been helping a lot of other countries. I don't agree with that necessarily, but ammunition, rather than shipping rifles and the ammunition, they already have the rifles. If we had an ammunition manufacturing source here that was able to manufacture it for our allies, so to speak, that are in NATO, that are slowly transitioning. Believe it or not, Poland just transitioned a couple years ago to a 5.56. Now, they've also transitioned to a new rifle to get away from the Russians and the Russian designs, the AKs. Now, I understand that. I'm an AK guy because I like how the gun works. It was my first black rifle. I've given that explanation multiple times on this vlog or blog podcast. So I will fully admit I have a buy-in for this cartridge, or have a selfish interest that I want to see this cartridge develop and get better. And I'm of the volition that Americans and Germans usually make the best stuff possible in the gun world. Now, I love the AK. It is probably the only thing that the Russians have ever made, I would say even better than their vodka. Russians have built the AK to be really, really fault tolerant. Let's put it that way. You can abuse it. You can neglect it. One of those issues with neglect, though, especially with the 5.45, is if you're using that corrosive ammo, you're going to have to run water, plain Jane water down the barrel. Then you're going to have to re-clean the barrel to get the water out of the barrel and the chamber and all the other components. So there is a rust issue that comes with a 5.45 specifically if you're using military surplus, specifically 7 and 6. 7 and 6 used to be very plentiful, very available, and when the ATF killed that coming into the country from Russia at an extremely discounted price, because there was a point in time you could buy 1,000 rounds for $50. That killed the caliber to some extent. Now, I say to some extent like that, and there was hesitation there, is because there's more aftermarket support. My friend, my brother, is the best way to put it. I've known him since I was like 7. He has an AR-15 upper. And just like any of the other, like the 6.5 Grendel, or any of those that use the Russian parent cartridge, there's a little bit of curvature because of that angle. And it makes magazines harder to find. And you can do it. Mr. Guns and Gear has shown how to take a standard AR-15 magazine and modify it in such a way that you can use it for the caliber. What's different is the followers have to be different for the Russian 220 parent cartridge. And we need to start looking at, well, I hope people start looking at that. But in his AR-15, what I noticed was exactly everything I just said for the Russian rifle. There was no difference in the Russian AK versus shooting it in the AR, other than you probably would get better accuracy because there's better barrels, there's better parts, there's better things available. There isn't yet for the 545 because there isn't that much support in the AR market for the 545 yet, which is surprising to me because the 545 is a very interesting and intriguing cartridge, at least to me, and it was to my friend, so much so that he wanted one to see what it would do. But he's an AR guy. He's a dyed-in-the-wool. I like ARs because I can deal with them, I can support them, I can do everything with it. But that's not the end of the support for the cartridge. Even IWI, the guys that make the Tavor and the Ace, they've made specialty rifles, special runs in the 545 caliber. Palmetto State Armory is releasing newer versions of the AK-101 series in 545 because this is what the Russian or the fans of the AK community want. Understand, I realize the 545 is a direct ripoff of the 556. It is why it came into being. Is in Vietnam we use the 556, or the 223 specifically, and the Russians got a hold of the cartridge, naturally, because they were at war with us through a proxy, kind of like Ukraine right now, and the United States, and let's be honest, Afghanistan. We did the same thing to them in Afghanistan we're doing to them now in Ukraine. Again, Russians screwed up. They should never invade another country, and I hope they get their ass whipped for it. But with that, it's now in the United States parlance. It's here. And now is where I'd like to see the support from ammunition manufacturers, reloading data, bullet manufacturers for this cartridge, because it's not going to go away. It's just going to become more and more difficult with this administration to get to that. If you don't believe that we're under assault all the time, then this is a moot issue. We should be able to find a moot issue, I should say. We should be able to find 545 forever from places like Golden Tiger, which is, I believe, is like Taiwanese ammunition. But we'll never get the specifications and the performance out of the cartridge like the 556 unless we get aftermarket support in the ammunition space, not just the rifle space. Now, I know a lot of AK guys that just go out there and just plink away and dump mags, and you do you. But someone who likes precision shooting, someone who likes long-range shooting, I've not been a fan of either cartridge for long-range shooting because I have not seen a lot of rifles that were designed for that in this guise. In the 556, you can find 1,001 rifles that are made for shooting long-range with their caliber. Okay? It's time that the 545 comes into its own and we give it a shot. The problem with most cartridges like this is it's measured in metrics. And when I say metric measurement, the United States has a problem, and I stated this earlier, with metric measurement. You know, after all, we did put a man on the moon where no other country that follows the metric system did. And we tend to like American calibers. So 556 is 223. It's the parent cartridge for it, you know, which technically I believe is the 222 Remington was the parent cartridge for it, if I remember right, from Forgotten Weapons. If you can't tell, I'm a fan of the gun industry, guys, the gun tubers. It's also sad to report at the end of this, now that I'm saying this stuff, hey, by the way, if you're like what my content and you're a new person to this channel, like, share, and subscribe to us so that you can keep up to date with what we're doing. And if you have show ideas, email me so that we can make this more interactive. This was a comment posted on Rumble, and I thought it was a great idea that this guy was saying that the AK-12 kind of sucked. And I agree mostly. But when he hit the caliber, I'm like, I kind of like the caliber. And when I say the 5.5 or the AK-12 is kind of crap, if you followed that development of that rifle, and I can cover it more because I did a little video a while back, and I could probably revisit it with a lot more information now that I know more about it, and I got to dig more into seeing one. And Brandon Herrera is another guy that's covered it. But where I was going with that stuff with the gun tubers is YouTube right now is hunting gun tubers. Rob Ski just posted a video, or not a video, I think it was on Twitter or YouTube or something, or Facebook, where he got another strike. Mr. Guns and Gear hasn't been able to post for a while on YouTube, but Rumble doesn't seem to have a problem with us 2A guys. That's why I listened to Tim Pool and didn't really post a lot of video, but I use YouTube as a distributor for the podcast itself, for the audio-only podcast, because they're the biggest fish in the market right now. I understand Rumble has less viewers for right now, but they're growing. The other thing I think is exceptional about Rumble is they must be doing something right for them to be attacked with DDoS attacks right now. Earlier this morning, I saw that Rumble had posted up and said, hey, for all our creators, all our people that are using our product, this is basically what's going on. And that's sad because it means that they're on the nose. Creators are going here. It's not just a conservative space. It mostly is because those are the groups that have been most censored on YouTube. So they're finding a way to get their message out and get their content out. Now, I'm new to this space, so please understand it. You know, you've seen how goofy some of the stuff I've done is. A lot of it was before I started using OBS. And OBS was a culture shock for even a tech guy because there's a heck of a lot more bells and whistles there. So I'll leave you with those thoughts that, hey, support your creators and to look up on Rumble. All of our creators that we like, the gun tubers, are slowly, if not always, been on Rumble. They're slowly moving to Rumble, but a lot of them were always here. I mean, Tim from Military Arms Channel, he's like, I've been on there since they've been there. Tim's a cool cat. He's one of those guys that's always fighting the fight. So is Mike with Mr. Guns and Gear. Most of the time, he's showing you how to be safe with a firearm. YouTube has a problem with that. Rumble doesn't seem to have a problem with your rights, which is strange as heck because the guys that run this originally are from Canada. They're moving to Florida, I believe, or Texas or something like that. They're becoming all-American. So I'm all about helping the new guys like me come into the same time as they are. So again, please like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, be great and do awesome things today.